Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, better known as Vladimir Lenin, was born on April 22, 1870, in Simbirsk, Russia. His life and ideas would dramatically alter the course of the 20th century. Lenin's journey from a middle-class upbringing to the helm of the Bolshevik Revolution is a testament to his unwavering commitment to revolutionary change. He died on January 21, 1924, leaving behind a complex legacy that continues to inspire debate and discussion. In May 1889, the Ulyanov family moved to Samara, known as Kuibyshev, from 1935 to 1991. After much petitioning, Lenin was granted permission to take his law examinations. In November 1891, he passed his examinations, taking a first in all subjects, and graduated with a first-class degree. After the police finally waived their political objections, Lenin was admitted to the bar and practiced law in Samara in 1892-93. His clients being mainly poor peasants and artisans. In his experience practicing law, he acquired an intense loathing for the class bias of the legal system and a lifelong revulsion for lawyers, even those who claimed to be social democrats. Law proved to be an extremely useful cover for a revolutionary activist. He moved to St. Petersburg in August 1893, and while working as a public defender, associated with revolutionary Marxist circles. In 1895, his comrades sent him abroad to make contact with Russian exiles in Western Europe, especially with Russia's most commanding Marxist thinker, Georgy Plekhanov. Upon his return to Russia in 1895, Lenin and other Marxists, including L. Martov, the future leader of the Mensheviks, succeeded in unifying the Marxist groups of the capital in an organization known as the Union for the Struggle for the Liberation of the Working Class. The Union issued leaflets and proclamations on the workers' behalf, supported workers' strikes, and infiltrated workers' education classes to impart to them the rudiments of Marxism. In December 1895, the leaders of the Union were arrested. Lenin was jailed for 15 months and thereafter was sent into exile to Shushenskoye in Siberia for a term of 3 years. He was joined there in exile by his fiancée Nadezhda Krupskaya, a Union member whom he had met in the capital. They were married in Siberia and she became Lenin's indispensable secretary and comrade. In exile, they conducted clandestine party correspondence and collaborated legally on a Russian translation of Sidney and Beatrice Webb's Industrial Democracy. Upon completing his term of Siberian exile in January 1900, Lenin left the country and was joined later by Krupskaya in Munich. His first major task abroad was to join Plekhanov, Martov, and 3 other editors in bringing out the newspaper Iskra, which they hoped would unify the Russian Marxist groups that were scattered throughout Russia and Western Europe into a cohesive social democratic party. Exile did little to dampen Lenin's revolutionary spirit. While in Siberia, he continued to write and develop his Marxist theories, honing his critique of capitalism and the Tsarist autocracy. He also used this time to forge connections with other exiled revolutionaries, laying the groundwork for the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 presented Lenin with an opportunity to put his revolutionary ideas into action. The war exposed the weaknesses of the Tsarist regime, creating widespread social unrest and economic hardship. Lenin, seizing this moment, returned to Russia from exile in 1917, rallying the Bolsheviks under the slogan, "Peace, Land, and Bread." The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, successfully overthrew the provisional government in October 1917, marking the beginning of the world's first socialist state. Lenin's leadership proved crucial in consolidating Bolshevik power in the aftermath of the revolution. He oversaw the establishment of key Soviet institutions, including the Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police. He also implemented a series of radical economic and social reforms, including the nationalization of industry and the collectivization of agriculture. Lenin's death in 1924, at the age of 53, plunged the Soviet Union into a period of uncertainty. His legacy as the architect of the Bolshevik Revolution and the founder of the Soviet state remains a subject of intense debate. His ideas, which became enshrined as Leninism, continue to influence political movements and inspire debate around the world. The differences between Lenin and the Mensheviks became sharper in the revolution of 1905 and its aftermath, when Lenin moved to a distinctly original view on two issues: class alignments in the revolution and the character of the post-revolutionary regime. The outbreak of the revolution, in January 1905, found Lenin abroad in Switzerland, and he did not return to Russia until November. Immediately, Lenin set down a novel strategy. Both wings of the RSDWP, Bolshevik and Menshevik, adhered to Plekhanov's view of the revolution in two stages. First, a bourgeois revolution. Second, a proletarian revolution. But the Mensheviks argued that the bourgeois revolution must be led by the bourgeoisie, with whom the proletariat must ally itself in order to make the democratic revolution. This would bring the liberal bourgeoisie to full power, whereupon the RSDWP would act as the party of opposition. Lenin defiantly rejected this kind of alliance and post-revolutionary regime. Hitherto he had spoken of the need for the proletariat to win hegemony in the democratic revolution. Now he flatly declared that the proletariat was the driving force of the revolution and that its only reliable ally was the peasantry. The bourgeoisie he branded as hopelessly counter-revolutionary and too cowardly to make its own revolution. Thus, unlike the Mensheviks, Lenin henceforth banked on an alliance that would establish a revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and the peasantry. Nor would the revolution necessarily stop at the first stage, the bourgeois revolution. If the Russian Revolution should inspire the Western European proletariat to make the socialist revolution, for which industrial Europe was ripe, the Russian Revolution might well pass over directly to the second stage, the socialist revolution. Then the Russian proletariat, supported by the rural proletariat and semi-proletariat at home, and assisted by the triumphant industrial proletariat of the West, which had established its dictatorship of the proletariat, could cut short the lifespan of Russian capitalism. After the defeat of the revolution of 1905, the issue between Lenin and the Mensheviks was more clearly drawn than ever, despite efforts at reunion. But, forced again into exile from 1907 to 1917, Lenin found serious challenges to his policies not only from the Mensheviks but within his own faction as well. The combination of repression and modest reform effected by the Tsarist regime led to a decline of party membership. Disillusionment and despair in the chances of successful revolution swept the dwindled party ranks, rent by controversies over tactics and philosophy. Attempts to unite the Bolshevik and Menshevik factions came to naught, all breaking on Lenin's intransigent insistence that his conditions for reunification be adopted. As one Menshevik opponent described Lenin, "There is no other man who is absorbed by the revolution 24 hours a day, who has no other thoughts but the thought of revolution, and who even when he sleeps, dreams of nothing but revolution." Placing revolution above party unity, Lenin would accept no unity compromise if he thought it might delay, not accelerate, revolution. Desperately fighting to maintain the cohesion of the Bolsheviks against internal differences and the Mensheviks' growing strength at home, Lenin convened the Bolshevik Party Conference at Prague in 1912, which split the RSDWP forever. Lenin proclaimed that the Bolsheviks were the RSDWP and that the Mensheviks were schismatics. Thereafter, each faction maintained its separate central committee, party apparatus, and press. When war broke out in August 1914, socialist parties throughout Europe rallied behind their governments, despite the resolutions of pre-war congresses of the Second International, obliging them to resist or even overthrow their respective governments if they plunged their countries into an imperialist war. After Lenin recovered from his initial disbelief in this betrayal of the International, he proclaimed a policy whose audacity stunned his own Bolshevik comrades. He denounced the pro-war socialists as social chauvinists, who had betrayed the international working-class cause by support of a war that was imperialist on both sides. He pronounced the Second International as dead and appealed for the creation of a new Third International composed of genuinely revolutionary socialist parties. More immediately, revolutionary socialists must work to transform the imperialist war into civil war. The real enemy of the worker was not the worker in the opposite trench, but the capitalist at home. Workers and soldiers should therefore turn their guns on their rulers and destroy the system that had plunged them into imperialist carnage. Lenin's policy found few advocates in Russia or elsewhere in the first months of the war. Indeed, in the first flush of patriotic fervor, not a few Bolsheviks supported the war effort. Lenin and his closest comrades were left in isolated bands swimming against the current. Lenin succeeded in reaching neutral Switzerland in September 1914, there joining a small group of anti-war Bolshevik and Menshevik émigrés. The war virtually cut them off from all contact with Russia and with like-minded socialists in other countries. Nevertheless, in 1915 and 1916, anti-war socialists in various countries managed to hold two anti-war conferences in Zimmerwald and Kienthal, Switzerland. Lenin failed at both meetings to persuade his comrades to adopt his slogan, "Transform the imperialist war into civil war." They adopted instead the more moderate formula, an immediate peace without annexations or indemnities and the right of the peoples to self-determination. Lenin consequently found his party a minority within the group of anti-war socialists, who in turn constituted a small minority of the international socialist movement compared with the pro-war socialists. Undaunted, Lenin continued to hammer home his views on the war, confident that eventually he would win decisive support. In his Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, 1917, he set out to explain first the real causes of the war. Second, why socialists had abandoned internationalism for patriotism and supported the war. And third, why revolution alone could bring about a just, democratic peace. War erupted, he wrote, because of the insatiable, expansionist character of imperialism, itself a product of monopoly finance capitalism. At the end of the 19th century, a handful of banks had come to dominate the advanced countries, which by 1914 had in their respective empires brought the rest of the world under their direct or indirect controls. Amassing vast quantities of surplus capital, the giant banks found they could garner super profits on investments in colonies and semi-colonies, and this intensified the race for empire among the great powers. By 1914, dissatisfied with the way the world had been shared out, rival coalitions of imperialists launched the war to bring about a redivision of the world at the expense of the other coalition. The war was therefore imperialist in its origins and aims, and deserved the condemnation of genuine socialists. Socialist Party and trade union leaders had rallied to support their respective imperialist governments because they represented the labor aristocracy, the better-paid workers who received a small share of the colonial super-profits the imperialists proffered them. Bribed by the imperialists, the labor aristocracy took the side of their paymasters in the imperialist war and betrayed the most exploited workers at home and the super-exploited in the colonies. The imperialists, Lenin contended, driven by an annexationist dynamic, could not conclude a just, lasting peace. Future wars were inevitable so long as imperialism existed. Imperialism was inevitable so long as capitalism existed. Only the overthrow of capitalism everywhere could end the imperialist war and prevent such wars in the future. First published in Russia in 1917, imperialism to this day provides the instrument that communists everywhere employ to evaluate major trends in the non-communist world. As Lenin's words began to spread, more and more revolutionaries found hope in his vision. The Russian people, weary of war and suffering, started to see Lenin not just as a leader, but as a beacon of change. The seeds of revolution had been sown, and soon they would grow into a movement that would shake the foundations of the world. This was the beginning of a new chapter in history, one where the voices of the oppressed would rise, and the old order would be challenged. In the tumultuous years that followed, Lenin's relentless pursuit of his revolutionary ideals would lead to the momentous events of 1917, forever altering the course of history and leaving an indelible mark on the world. Join us in the next chapter as we delve into the dramatic events of the October Revolution and the establishment of Soviet Russia. The journey of revolution has just begun. From March to September 1917, the Bolsheviks remained a minority in the Soviets. By autumn, however, the provisional government, now led by the moderate socialist Alexander Kerensky, had lost popular support. Increasing war weariness and the breakdown of the economy overtaxed the patience of the workers, peasants, and soldiers, who demanded immediate and fundamental change. Lenin capitalized on the growing disillusionment with Kerensky's ability and willingness to complete the revolution. Kerensky in turn claimed that only a freely elected constituent assembly could decide Russia's political future, but that must await the return of order. Meanwhile, Lenin and the party demanded peace, land, and bread, immediately, without further delay. The Bolshevik line won increasing support among the workers, soldiers, and peasants. By September, they voted in a Bolshevik majority in the Petrograd Soviet and in the Soviets of the major cities and towns throughout the country. Decision to seize power. Lenin, who had gone underground in July after being accused as a German agent by Kerensky's government, now decided that the time was ripe to seize power. The party must immediately begin preparations for an armed uprising to depose the provisional government and transfer state power to the Soviets, now headed by a Bolshevik majority. Lenin's decision to establish Soviet power derived from his belief that the proletarian revolution must smash the existing state machinery and introduce a dictatorship of the proletariat. That is, direct rule by the armed workers and peasants, which would eventually wither away into a non-coercive, classless, stateless, communist society. He expounded this view most trenchantly in his brochure The State and Revolution, written while he was still in hiding. The brochure, though never completed and often dismissed as Lenin's most utopian work, nevertheless served as Lenin's doctrinal springboard to power. Until 1917, all revolutionary socialists rightly believed, Lenin wrote, that a parliamentary republic could serve a socialist system as well as a capitalist. But the Russian Revolution had brought forth something new, the Soviets. Created by workers, soldiers and peasants and excluding the propertied classes, the Soviets infinitely surpassed the most democratic of parliaments in democracy, because parliaments everywhere virtually excluded workers and peasants. The choice before Russia in early September 1917, as Lenin saw it, was either a Soviet republic, a dictatorship of the propertyless majority, or a parliamentary republic, a dictatorship of the propertied minority. Lenin therefore raised the slogan, "All power to the Soviets," even though he had willingly conceded in the spring of 1917 that revolutionary Russia was the freest of all the belligerent countries. To Lenin, however, the provisional government was merely a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie that kept Russia in the imperialist war. What is more, it had turned openly counter-revolutionary in the month of July when it accused the Bolshevik leaders of treason. From late September, Lenin, a fugitive in Finland, sent a stream of articles and letters to Petrograd, feverishly exhorting the party central committee to organize an armed uprising without delay. The opportune moment might be lost. But for nearly a month, Lenin's forceful urgings from afar were unsuccessful. As in April, Lenin again found himself in the party minority. He resorted to a desperate stratagem. Around October 20th, Lenin, in disguise and at considerable personal risk, slipped into Petrograd and attended a secret meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee held on the evening of October 23rd. Not until after a heated 10-hour debate did he finally win a majority in favor of preparing an armed takeover. Now steps to enlist the support of soldiers and sailors and to train the Red Guards, the Bolshevik-led workers' militia, for an armed takeover proceeded openly under the guise of self-defense of the Petrograd Soviet. But preparations moved haltingly because serious opposition to the fateful decision persisted in the Central Committee. Enthusiastically in accord with Lenin on the timeliness of an armed uprising, Trotsky led its preparation from his strategic position as newly elected chairman of the Petrograd Soviet. Lenin, now hiding in Petrograd and fearful of further procrastination, desperately pressed the Central Committee to fix an early date for the uprising. On the evening of November 6th, he wrote a letter to the members of the Central Committee exhorting them to proceed that very evening to arrest the members of the provisional government. To delay would be fatal. The Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets, scheduled to convene the next evening, should be placed before a fait accompli. By 1917 it seemed to Lenin that the war would never end, and that the prospect of revolution was rapidly receding. But in the week of March 8-15, the starving, freezing, war-weary workers and soldiers of Petrograd, until 1914 St. Petersburg, succeeded in deposing the Tsar. Lenin and his closest lieutenants hastened home after the German authorities agreed to permit their passage through Germany to neutral Sweden. Berlin hoped that the return of anti-war socialists to Russia would undermine the Russian war effort. Lenin arrived in Petrograd on April 16, 1917. 1 month after the Tsar had been forced to abdicate. Out of the revolution was born the provisional government, formed by a group of leaders of the bourgeois liberal parties. This government's accession to power was made possible only by the assent of the Petrograd Soviet, a council of workers' deputies elected in the factories of the capital. Similar Soviets of workers' deputies sprang up in all the major cities and towns throughout the country, as did Soviets of soldiers' deputies and of peasants' deputies. Although the Petrograd Soviet had been the sole political power recognized by the revolutionary workers and soldiers in March 1917, its leaders had hastily turned full power over to the provisional government. The Petrograd Soviet was headed by a majority composed of Menshevik and Socialist Revolutionary (SR) or Peasant Party leaders who regarded the March, February OS revolution as bourgeois. Hence, they believed that the new regime should be headed by leaders of the bourgeois parties. On his return to Russia, Lenin electrified his own comrades, most of whom accepted the authority of the provisional government. Lenin called this government, despite its democratic pretensions, thoroughly imperialist and undeserving of support by socialists. It was incapable of satisfying the most profound desires of the workers, soldiers and peasants for immediate peace and division of landed estates among the peasants. Only a Soviet government, that is, direct rule by workers, soldiers and peasants, could fulfill these demands. Therefore, he raised the battle cry, "All power to the Soviets." Although the Bolsheviks still constituted a minority within the Soviets, and despite the manifest unwillingness of the Menshevik SR majority to exercise such power. This introduced what Lenin called the period of dual power. Under the leadership of opportunist socialists, the Soviets, the real power, had relinquished power to the provisional government, the nominal power in the land. The Bolsheviks, Lenin exhorted, must persuade the workers, peasants and soldiers, temporarily deceived by the opportunists, to retrieve state power for the Soviets from the provisional government. This would constitute a second revolution, but so long as the government did not suppress the revolutionary parties, this revolution could be achieved peacefully, since the provisional government existed only by the sufferance of the Soviets. Initially, Lenin's fellow Bolsheviks thought that he was temporarily disoriented by the complexity of the situation. Moderate socialists thought him mad. It required several weeks of sedulous persuasion by Lenin before he won the Bolshevik Party Central Committee to his view. The April Party Conference endorsed his program. The party must withhold support from the provisional government and win a majority in the Soviets in favor of Soviet power. A Soviet government once established should begin immediate negotiations for a general peace on all fronts. The Soviets should forthwith confiscate landlords' estates without compensation, nationalize all land, and divide it among the peasants. And the government should establish tight controls over privately owned industry to the benefit of labor. The stage was set for the October Revolution. The provisional government, precariously holding on to power, was about to face an unprecedented challenge. The Bolsheviks, under Lenin's uncompromising leadership, were ready to seize the moment. The world was on the brink of witnessing a seismic shift in power, one that would forever alter the course of history. Stay with us as we delve into the dramatic events that culminated in the rise of Soviet Russia. The crucible of revolution was about to forge a new era. On November 7th and 8th, the Bolshevik-led Red Guards and revolutionary soldiers and sailors, meeting only slight resistance, deposed the provisional government and proclaimed that state power had passed into the hands of the Soviets. By this time, the Bolsheviks, with their allies among the left SRs, dissidents who broke with the pro-Kerensky SR leaders, constituted an absolute majority of the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets. The delegates therefore voted overwhelmingly to accept full power and elected Lenin as chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, the new Soviet government, and approved his peace decree and land decree. Overnight, Lenin had vaulted from his hideout as a fugitive to head the revolutionary government of the largest country in the world. Since his youth, he had spent his life building a party that would win such a victory. And now at the age of 47, he and his party had triumphed. "It makes one's head spin," he confessed. But power neither intoxicated nor frightened Lenin, it cleared his head. Soberly, he steered the Soviet government toward the consolidation of its power and negotiations for peace. In the weeks that followed, Lenin and the Bolsheviks moved swiftly to solidify their control. They faced immediate challenges, from internal dissent to external threats. The peace decree aimed to withdraw Russia from the devastating world war, while the land decree sought to redistribute land to the peasantry. These measures were designed to garner popular support, but they also incited fierce opposition. The nascent Soviet government was under siege from all sides. The civil war loomed on the horizon, threatening to undo all that Lenin and his comrades had fought for. Yet, amid the chaos, Lenin remained resolute. His vision for a socialist state was unyielding, and he was prepared to face any obstacle to achieve it. The world watched in awe and apprehension as Lenin's government navigated the turbulent waters of revolution and reform. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but the foundations of Soviet power had been laid. The revolution had succeeded, but the struggle to shape the future of Russia was just beginning. Join us next time as we explore the challenges and triumphs of the early Soviet state, the bloody civil war, and the relentless drive for consolidation and control. The legacy of Lenin's revolution was unfolding, and its impact would resonate across the globe for decades to come. As the Bolshevik Revolution solidified its hold on Russia, Lenin recognized the need to extend the revolutionary fervor beyond its borders. The world was still largely dominated by imperialist powers, and Lenin saw the potential for a global uprising. To break this encirclement, he called on revolutionaries worldwide to form communist parties that would emulate the example of the Bolshevik Revolution. In a dramatic break with the reformist Second International, Lenin changed the name of the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, RSDWP, to the Russian Communist Party, Bolsheviks, in 1918. This rebranding was more than symbolic. It signified a new era and a new mission. By March 1919, Lenin founded the Communist or Third International. This body accepted the affiliation only of parties that adhered strictly to its decisions, imposed iron discipline, and made a clear break with the Second International. Lenin's vision was clear. The Russian Communist Party, the only party that had successfully led a revolution, would serve as the model for communist parties worldwide. This policy led to a significant split in the global labor movement, dividing it between adherents of the Second and Third Internationals. The Third International, however, found its greatest success in the colonial world. By championing the rights of people in colonies and semi-colonies to self-determination and independence, it garnered significant sympathy for communism. Lenin's policies reverberate through the world even today, demonstrating his unique ability to find allies where revolutionaries had not before. By aligning with national liberation movements, Lenin could claim that the overwhelming majority of the world's population, then living under imperialist rule, as well as the European proletariat, were natural allies of the Bolshevik Revolution. Lenin's revolutionary genius was not just in dividing his enemies but in finding allies and friends for the Russian proletariat. First, he won the Russian peasants to the side of the proletariat. Second, while he did not inspire successful communist revolutions in the West, he did compel Western governments to curtail armed intervention against the Bolshevik Revolution. Third, although the Asian revolutions barely stirred in his lifetime, they strengthened the belief among Soviet communists that they were not alone in a hostile world. By 1921, Lenin's government had crushed all opposition parties, claiming they had opposed or insufficiently supported the Soviet cause during the Civil War. Lenin believed their opposition was more dangerous than ever, as the peasantry and a significant section of the working class had become disaffected with the Soviet regime. To repress these opponents, Lenin demanded harsh measures including show trials and frequent use of the death penalty. He also insisted on tighter control over dissent within the party. This insistence on the merciless destruction of opposition led many to conclude that Lenin, though personally opposed to one-man rule, had unwittingly paved the way for Joseph Stalin's dictatorship. By 1922, Lenin was keenly aware that the greatest danger to socialism in Russia was the degeneration of the Soviet system and party. He found the party and state apparatus entangled in red tape and incompetence, and the Soviets of workers' and peasants' deputies drained of all power. Most disturbing was the great Russian chauvinism that leading Bolsheviks exhibited toward non-Russian nationalities during the state reorganization, a process in which Stalin played a key role. In April 1922, Stalin's appointment as General Secretary of the party allowed him to rapidly concentrate immense power in his hands. Lenin strained every nerve to reverse these trends, which he regarded as antithetical to socialism, and to replace Stalin. The formation of the Third International was a testament to Lenin's global revolutionary vision, but it also foreshadowed the internal struggles that would plague the Soviet Union in the years to come. The seeds of both global communist solidarity and internal Soviet strife were sown, setting the stage for the tumultuous decades that followed. In the spring of 1922, Lenin fell seriously ill. His health had been precarious for years, but this time it was different. In April, his doctors extracted from his neck one of the bullets he had received from the assassin's gun in August 1918. He recovered rapidly from the operation, but a month later he fell ill again, partially paralyzed and unable to speak. By June, Lenin made a partial recovery and threw himself into the formation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the federal system of reorganization he favored against Stalin's unitary scheme. This was a critical moment. Lenin's vision for the USSR was one of a federation of equal republics, a stark contrast to Stalin's more centralized approach. However, his health deteriorated once more in December, leaving him incapacitated by semi-paralysis. Although no longer the active leader of the state and party, Lenin mustered the strength to dictate several prescient articles and what is known as his political testament. Between December 23, 1922 and January 4, 1923, he expressed a great fear for the stability of the party under the leadership of forceful personalities such as Stalin and Trotsky. He warned of the dangers posed by Stalin's increasing power and the potential for abuse within the Soviet system. On March 10, 1923, another stroke deprived him of speech, marking the end of his political activity. The final blow came on the morning of January 21, 1924, when he suffered yet another stroke and died that evening in the village of Gorky, now known as Gorky Leninskaya. The last year of Lenin's political life, when he fought to eradicate abuses of his socialist ideals and the corruption of power, may well have been his greatest. Whether the history of the Soviet Union would have been fundamentally different had he survived beyond his 54th birthday, no one can say with certainty. Yet his final efforts to guide and shape the future of the Soviet state left an indelible mark on its history and on the global revolutionary movement. Join us as we explore the enduring legacy of Lenin's vision and how his ideas continued to shape the course of history even after his passing. The year was 1924 and the world was coming to terms with the passing of one of its most transformative figures. Lenin's death marked the end of an era, but his legacy was far from over. His vision for a socialist state had set the stage for a new world order, one that would continue to influence global politics for decades. Despite the internal strife and external threats, Lenin's policies had laid the groundwork for the Soviet Union's survival and growth. The new economic policy had stabilized the economy, while his diplomatic maneuvers had secured the Soviet state's place on the international stage. Yet the dream of a global proletarian revolution remained unfulfilled, leaving Soviet Russia isolated in a hostile capitalist world. Lenin's impact extended beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. His theories of Marxism-Leninism inspired movements worldwide, from the streets of Beijing to the jungles of Latin America. Leaders like Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro drew from Lenin's playbook, adapting his strategies to their own revolutionary contexts. The ripple effects of Lenin's revolution could be felt across continents, shaping the 20th century geopolitical landscape. However, Lenin's legacy was also a double-edged sword. The authoritarian measures he implemented to maintain power set a precedent for future Soviet leaders. His centralization of authority and suppression of dissent would be echoed in the regimes of Stalin and beyond, leading to a period of severe repression and human rights abuses. As we look back on Lenin's life and legacy, we see a complex figure whose ideas and actions continue to provoke debate and reflection. Was he a visionary leader who brought justice and equality to the masses, or a ruthless autocrat who sacrificed individual freedoms for the sake of the state? The answer may lie somewhere in between, a testament to the multifaceted nature of historical legacies. Join us next time as we delve into the turbulent years following Lenin's death, the rise of Stalin, and the enduring impact of Lenin's ideology on the world stage. The story of the Soviet Union is far from over, and its lessons continue to resonate in our contemporary world.